Japan had removed USS Yorktown from its Midway calculations. Then, with Midway only days away, shipyard workers began emergency repairs on a damaged carrier to make it useful in battle again. The famous number needs care. Yorktown arrived at Pearl Harbor on 27th of May 1942, entered Dry Dock No. 1 on 28th of May, and departed on the morning of 30th May. The emergency turnaround is commonly remembered as 72 hours, although the core dock work lasted closer to 2 days. What mattered wasn't an exact stopwatch. Midway was expected in the first week of June, and Yorktown had to reach the carrier force before the battle began. Japanese planners expected to meet USS Enterprise and USS Hornet. Yorktown had been hit at the Battle of the Coral Sea on 8th May, and Japanese estimates treated her as sunk or too badly damaged to be available. Those weren't identical conclusions, but they produced the same operational assumption: 2 American fleet carriers, not 3. That assumption had a physical basis. Yorktown had not escaped Coral Sea with cosmetic damage. A Japanese bomb struck near the after end of her island, close to the No. 2 elevator and slightly to starboard. It punched through the flight deck and several decks below before exploding above the 4th deck near the forward engine room area. The blast tore through ship service spaces, aviation stores, offices, and repair party areas. It damaged lighting and electrical systems across 3 decks. About 66 men were killed or seriously wounded. The direct hit was only part of the problem. A near miss, roughly 20 feet off Yorktown's port side, deformed shell plating amidships, ruptured fuel oil tanks, opened seams, and left an oil slick behind the carrier as she withdrew. Along one 24-foot stretch of hull, rivets in a lap joint were sheared or blown out. Behind that plating, internal strengthening structure had been shattered or displaced. Yorktown could still move. She had continued limited carrier operations during Coral Sea and withdrew under her own power. But a carrier does not need to be sinking to be unavailable. Her hull leaked. Her flight deck had a bomb hole. Electrical systems had been damaged. Machinery and superheater boiler work remained unfinished. Rear Admiral Aubrey Fitch's broad assessment associated full repair with a period of roughly 90 days. That was an American estimate, not a Japanese one. Japan didn't need to know the number. It only needed to believe Yorktown wouldn't be back for Midway. By 27th of May, Yorktown was alongside at Pearl Harbor, with a battle only days away. Naval intelligence had broken enough Japanese communications traffic to identify Midway as the target. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz needed every available flight deck. Later accounts describe Nimitz inspecting Yorktown while Dry Dock No. 1 was still pumping out. Those accounts attribute a 3-day demand to him: "Get the carrier ready for sea." The precise words were recorded later, not in a surviving 1942 order. The deadline itself is beyond dispute. Yorktown entered the dock on 28th of May and had to sail on 30th of May. That left the shipyard with a decision that defined the entire job. Do they restore Yorktown to original condition, or do they make her useful before the next battle? The answer was triage. Keep water out, keep aircraft moving, keep enough steam in the plant to move the ship and launch planes. Everything else could wait. More than 1,400 tradesmen worked around the clock, joined by naval personnel and Yorktown's own crew. Other accounts put the number nearer 1,500. The exact shift roster hasn't survived, but the workforce is clear. Welders, electricians, ship fitters, machinists, pipe fitters, sheet metal workers, carpenters, riggers, mechanics, technicians, and draftsmen. Their workplace was a 25,500-ton carrier in a dock built for battleships, 1,002 feet long and 138 feet wide. Yorktown herself stretched more than 824 feet from bow to stern. Her machinery plant had 9 boilers. Her flight deck had to carry aircraft, fuel crews, ammunition teams, and arresting gear. Every repair choice touched something else. Accounts from the shipyard describe the workforce beginning while water still drained from dry dock number 1. That image survives because it captures the urgency, but it shouldn't be inflated into a claim that all 1,400 workers were aboard at once. What is documented is the scale of the effort and the fact that the job began before the normal rhythms of a yard period could take hold. Oahu felt the demand as well. Rolling blackouts were arranged to direct electrical power toward the massive welding effort at Pearl Harbor. The lights dimmed in Honolulu so welders could keep cutting and joining steel on Yorktown. The hull came first. Yorktown's portside near-miss damage had opened seams and ruptured oil boundaries. A carrier sailing toward Midway couldn't leave a fuel slick behind her, and she couldn't accept a hull that might flood under ordinary sea pressure. Workers forced damaged shell plating back toward alignment. They welded where the original ship had used riveted construction. Large steel plates went over damaged areas and seams. The third deck was patched. Watertight doors and hatches in damaged sections were replaced or refitted. That work didn't restore every damaged layer behind the hull. The internal shell-strengthening structure, shattered by the Coral Sea near-miss, couldn't be fully replaced before Yorktown left. Rebuilding it properly meant opening damaged spaces, removing distorted structure, fitting new members, and restoring the original strength system. The yard didn't have time. So the carrier received an emergency solution: a hull tight enough to sail and fight, with major structural restoration deferred. One later Naval Institute account says workers shored weakened bulkheads with timber. The record does not securely identify the exact bulkheads, dimensions, or arrangement of that shoring. It does establish the larger truth. Where damaged spaces could be supported quickly, the yard used expedient reinforcement rather than waiting for a complete reconstruction. Steel held water out. Timber helped brace weakened areas. Neither was a return to peacetime condition. Flight operations came next. The Coral Sea bomb had ripped through the flight deck near the island and number 2 elevator. A carrier without a usable deck is a floating airfield with no runway. Yorktown's elevators had escaped the worst of the Coral Sea damage, a crucial advantage. The shipyard patched the flight deck damage sufficiently for aircraft to take off and land at Midway. That word, sufficiently, carries the entire story. No surviving work order supports a claim that every aviation system was stripped down and renewed in those days. We can't say every arresting wire, gasoline line, catapult component, radio circuit, or barrier was replaced. What the next week proves is simpler and more important. Yorktown could launch aircraft, recover them, arm them, fuel them, and send them into combat. Then came propulsion. Before Coral Sea, Yorktown's 9 boilers drove 4 shafts through geared turbines and gave the carrier a designed top speed of more than 32 knots. Pearl Harbor didn't restore that plant to full capacity. 3 of the 9 boilers remained inoperable when Yorktown sailed. That wasn't a hidden defect, it was an accepted limit. A carrier needed enough steam to turn into the wind, accelerate, and launch aircraft. It needed enough speed to keep station with Enterprise and Hornet. It didn't need a perfect machinery report before 30th May. Full repair of the damaged superheater boiler system was deferred because the battle date wouldn't wait. The workers weren't repairing Yorktown by department. They were protecting 3 outcomes. Water had to stay outside the hull. Aircraft had to move across the deck. Steam had to reach enough of the propulsion plant to take the carrier to war. That is why the 72-hour legend can mislead. It suggests 3 days of miraculous reconstruction. The actual achievement was narrower and harder. Thousands of decisions about what could fail later, what had to function now, and what could be reinforced rather than rebuilt. On the 29th of May, an official Navy photograph captured Yorktown in dry dock number 1. USS West Virginia, sunk during the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor less than 6 months earlier, appears in the distance under salvage work. Yorktown's flight deck fills the foreground. She looks complete from afar because a carrier's scale can conceal what its workers know. Damaged spaces below the deck were still patched, braced, wired, and unfinished. The next morning, 30th of May, Yorktown left Pearl Harbor. She didn't leave because every repair was complete. She left because the tasks that couldn't wait had been done. Work had continued after Yorktown undocked on 29th of May and moved to the pier area for installation, loading, and final preparation. As she sailed through the Pearl Harbor Channel, selected shipyard workers and repair crews from USS Vestal remained aboard. NAVSEA records state that those crews continued repairs at sea and departed in small boats the following day. A shipyard crew sailing out on a carrier headed for battle is the clearest measure of Yorktown's condition. She was operational enough to sail. She was battle-worthy under emergency conditions. She wasn't fully restored. 3 boilers were still unavailable. Internal hull support structure had not been comprehensively replaced. Some work was still happening after she reached open water. The emergency repair had created a window, not a guarantee. Yorktown's commanding officer, Captain Elliot Buckmaster, had brought her home from Coral Sea. His reports would later provide much of the technical record of what followed. But the carrier's return wasn't a captain's solo decision, or an admiral's command made real by itself. The order set the clock. Welders, fitters, electricians, machinists, pipe fitters, and crews working damaged compartments made the clock matter. Yorktown steamed northwest toward the designated operating area northeast of Midway, known as Point Luck. On the 2nd of June, she joined Enterprise and Hornet. The map had changed. Japan expected 2 American fleet carriers. Now there were 3: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. That didn't make Midway a simple contest of carrier numbers. American code breaking had provided warning. Midway's own aircraft and garrison would fight. Enterprise and Hornet carried their own air groups. Japanese operational decisions, reconnaissance failures, timing, weather, and combat losses all shaped the battle. But Yorktown's presence removed one advantage Japan thought it possessed. A force planned around 2 American carriers had to face a 3rd deck, a 3rd air group, and a 3rd source of attacks. The title of this story is often told through a sharp moment. Japanese lookouts seeing attacks arrive and suddenly counting 3 American carriers. The surviving evidence does not securely confirm one named lookout, one exact Torpedo Squadron 3 report, or a contemporaneous identification of Yorktown by name. The stronger fact is enough. Japanese pre-battle planning discounted Yorktown. On 4th of June, Yorktown was there. The assumption of 2 American fleet carriers was wrong. At dawn on 4th of June, Yorktown wasn't hiding behind the other carriers. She was conducting carrier operations. Her first launch included 10 SBD Dauntless scout bombers sent to search out to 100 miles. They found nothing and returned by 8:30 that morning. Yorktown then launched another attack group as Enterprise and Hornet sent theirs toward the Japanese carrier force. Her air group had been assembled under pressure as well. Scouting Squadron 5 had been replaced by Bombing Squadron 3 from USS Saratoga. Torpedo Squadron 5 had been replaced by Torpedo Squadron 3. Fighting Squadron 3 was reconstituted with pilots from VF-42 and VF-3 under Lieutenant Commander John Thatch. Some men had little combat experience. A carrier can be made available in days. Creating experienced aviators takes much longer. Yorktown's aircraft entered a battle whose outcome was never guaranteed. Her torpedo planes from Torpedo Squadron 3 attacked Japanese carriers under devastating fire. The Japanese combat air patrol came down low to engage the slow devastators. Many American torpedo planes were destroyed. Their attacks scored no torpedo hits. But the attacks forced Japanese fighters down towards sea level and drew their attention. Dive bombers found openings above the Japanese formation. Yorktown's SBD Dauntless dive bombers struck Soryu with 3 1,000-pound bombs. Enterprise aircraft hit Akagi and Kaga. In minutes, 3 Japanese carriers had become burning wrecks. Yorktown had done what the Pearl Harbor repair was designed to permit. She had reached the force. She had launched aircraft. She had put an air group into the fight. That is the point at which the emergency work earns its strategic meaning. The shipyard didn't build an indestructible carrier. It returned an assumed absence to the American order of battle. Hiryu, the 4th Japanese carrier, remained operational. Her aircraft found Yorktown. At 1:29 p.m., Yorktown's radar detected the first Hiryu strike approaching. Wildcats went out to intercept. They broke up part of the attack, but 3 Japanese dive bombs hit the carrier. One struck the flight deck. Another penetrated near the forward elevator. A third went down Yorktown's exhaust stack area, rupturing uptake ducts, disabling boilers 2 and 3, and extinguishing fires in boilers 2 through 6. Smoke and hot gases entered the fire rooms. The ship lost speed. Her aircraft operations stopped. For a carrier, a stack hit can become a machinery kill without touching the engines themselves. Boilers make steam. Steam needs a clear path through the uptake system. Damage the ducts that carry exhaust upward, and the fire rooms become dangerous spaces full of heat, smoke, and gas. Boilers can't simply be relit until the path is restored enough to operate. Yorktown had been patched at Pearl Harbor to get into battle. Now her sailors had to patch her again while Japanese aircraft were still in the air. Damage control teams fought fires near aviation gasoline stowage and magazines. Magazines were flooded as a precaution. Men worked to restore enough uptake integrity for the plant to breathe again. About 70 minutes after the stack hit, 4 boilers, 1, 4, 5, and 6, were back in service. Yorktown regained steam. She reached about 19 knots. She resumed air operations. 19 knots was far below the carrier's designed maximum, yet it was enough for the immediate task. The ship had been stopped and damaged. Her crew restored motion, wind over the deck, and the ability to send aircraft back into the fight. This wasn't a second version of the Pearl Harbor repair. The shipyard workers had worked in dock with cranes, shore power, equipment, and hundreds of specialists. The damage control parties at Midway worked at sea, inside a carrier that had just been bombed, with smoke in fire rooms and another enemy strike still possible. But the logic was the same. Restore the system that gives the ship its next chance. The second Hiryu strike arrived before Yorktown's recovery could become secure. Japanese torpedo bombers hit her twice on the port side. Flooding spread. The rudder jammed. Yorktown lost power again and developed a heavy port list. The carrier was abandoned after the aerial torpedo attack, though she didn't sink. Her aircraft remained in the battle. Some joined Enterprise aircraft in the attack that put Hiryu out of action later that afternoon. Yorktown had survived Coral Sea. Pearl Harbor had made her useful for Midway. Her crew had recovered from the first Midway bomb attack and restored 19 knots. The second aerial torpedo attack left her crippled but still afloat. Salvage parties returned. The destroyer USS Hammond came alongside to provide assistance. The fleet tug USS Vireo was involved in the towing and salvage effort. Men reboarded a carrier tilted by flooding and damaged by bombs and torpedoes, trying to preserve a ship that had already exceeded the expectations of the Japanese plan. Then, on the 6th of June, Japanese submarine I-168 penetrated the American screen. Its torpedoes struck Hammond and Yorktown. Hammond sank. Yorktown took additional submarine torpedo damage while salvage efforts continued. The new flooding, combined with the damage from the aerial torpedoes and the weakened boundaries already inside the ship. A Bureau of Ships analysis later concluded that Yorktown couldn't be recovered after the submarine attack. At dawn on the 7th of June 1942, USS Yorktown rolled over and sank. The official photograph of her final moments shows a carrier capsized in the Pacific, her hull exposed above the water. It's a hard image because the story began with a ship in another kind of vulnerability. Sitting in dry dock number 1 at Pearl Harbor, damaged below her flight deck, with water draining away and workers moving in. Between those two images lay 11 days. On the 27th of May, Yorktown arrived at Pearl Harbor, damaged from Coral Sea. On the 28th of May, she entered dry dock number 1. On the 30th of May, she sailed with repairs still being completed. On the 2nd of June, she joined Enterprise and Hornet at Point Luck. On the 4th of June, she launched aircraft against the Japanese carriers at Midway, endured bomb damage, restored 4 boilers, made 19 knots, and resumed flight operations. On the 7th of June, after the I-168 attack, she sank. Yorktown wasn't fully repaired in 3 days. She was made available by a repair effort that chose immediate combat utility over comprehensive restoration. Welded seams replaced a full rebuild of damaged hull structure. Flight deck damage was patched for aviation operations. 3 of 9 boilers remained unavailable. Timber shoring supported weakened bulkheads where complete structural work couldn't be finished. Workers were still aboard when the carrier sailed. Those choices created a narrow operational window. Japan had discounted Yorktown because Coral Sea had damaged her badly enough to appear unavailable. Pearl Harbor's workers and Yorktown's sailors turned that assumption into a problem Japan had not planned to face. 3 American carriers at Midway, not 2. And when Yorktown finally rolled into the Pacific on the 7th of June, the carrier had already done the work those emergency repairs were meant to buy. She had reached the battle.